Starting today, major changes to the federal student loan program taking effect, impacting millions of borrowers, and people are preparing for higher education classes. Jason Zimmerman breaking down what is different and what everyone needs to be aware of. He's live for us in the newsroom. Jason.
Cami, these changes, which are provisions within President Donald Trump's signature tax law passed last year, will impact roughly 700,000 people just in Wisconsin who owe more than $24 billion in student loans. It's an average of $34,000 per person. One of the biggest changes is the end of a Biden-era repayment program called Saving on a Valuable Education, or SAVE. Right now, about 7 million borrowers are enrolled in that program, and now they will have 90 days to switch to a new plan to pay back their student debt. Moving forward, it also means borrowers will face higher monthly payments on their student loans. Others will face new limits on loans. For example, graduate students pursuing master's degrees will only be able to take out federal loans up to $20,500 per year, or $100,000 in total.
If you have a kid that is a freshman, sophomore, junior, okay, you're grandfathered until that kid finishes. So you can borrow under the PLUS loan program as you did previously for their borrowings.
There are also new limits on Parent Plus loans, which is now a $65,000 lifetime limit on loans to parents for their children to attend college. Officials in the Trump administration argued these loan caps will put downward pressure on institutions to lower their costs, ultimately making higher education more affordable. Cami, back to you.